Do aircraft have a signal that alerts you in cases of imminent danger?
Well, there isn't just one signal. In fact, we have quite a few because of the many different kinds of dangers that potentially lurk. Some sound like a bell or like a horn. A bell in the event of fire, for example, and a horn if we forget to retract the running gear. And quite a few are generated by a computer voice. Then there is a so-called master caution light, which is what the person who asked this question was presumably referring to. It's this yellow lamp here in the pilot's field of view. It always catches your attention and lets you know if a system wants to tell you something. And next to it, can the camera capture it, is the so-called recall button, which tells you which system is involved, so then you can start analyzing the situation.
How is the call sign transmitted to ATC? Is the ACARS system connected to the transponder?
Also auch hier offensichtlich wieder eine Fachfrage.
This is also a question for specialists. For those who don't know, ATC stands for Air Traffic Control. These are the flight controllers we talk to. The other system is the so-called ACARS, and together with the transponder, it makes up a separate radio unit that sends a code down to air traffic control so they can identify us. And when we speak to them, we use this ATC call sign. We enter it into the FMS, the flight management system on the ground. They in fact correspond with each other. The data is transmitted from one computing unit to the next, and then via radio to the ground. So it's not done by a connection between the ACARS and the transponder, as the question suggested. Rather, in the case of this Boeing here, it's generated by the FMS and sent to the transponder.
Vom FMC, dem Flight Management System, wird es generiert an den Transponder.
What angle are the flaps set at before takeoff? Does this depend on the length of the runway?
Also jetzt von den Gradzahlen.
It all begins with a very low gradient, namely 1 degree. In the case of the Boeing, the climb gradient can be as much as 25 degrees. With most other types of aircraft, we speak of medium, light or full flap, or use similar designations. The gradient always lies in the range between 3 and a maximum of 30 degrees. In fact, yes, this does depend on the nature of the runway and also on what obstacles you might have in the immediate surroundings. If the obstacles are very near the runway, then we need to select a steep angle of climb. This means we tend to choose a high flap position. If the obstacles are high but further away, like in Munich, for example, and the terrain takes longer to become more mountainous, then we choose a lower flat position because we can accelerate and reach our optimal climbing speed faster. This creates a better gradient over the long run than in the initial phase. I've dipped into physics a bit to answer that question, but it was clearly raised by an expert.
When you yourself fly as a passenger, where do you sit?
Also der beste Platz, also gerade für
Well, the best place for relaxing, particularly if you have long legs like I do, are the XL seats next to the emergency exits. People often ask what the safest seats are. Actually, nobody really knows why, but statistically speaking, the seats in the back are the safest ones. And if knowing that gives you a good feeling, you might as well sit there. On the other hand, those who don't like the rocking movement are well advised to choose a seat further up front. It's calmer there, but safer in the back. And for those with long legs, an XL seat next to the emergency exit is the best.
What's more important? Minimum safe altitude, minimum vector altitude, or minimum sector altitude?
Ja, im Prinzip sind sie alle drei.
In principle, all three are important. Depends on your orientation. Sector altitude, as the name suggests, describes the altitude I must fly at when I am in a certain sector. By the way, for all three modes, this only applies if I have no visual contact with the ground, i.e. for blind flight or instrument flight, for example. In the case of minimum vector altitude, I pass some of the responsibility on to the flight controller. So, as a pilot, I must make sure I'm really flying in the part of the airspace the traffic controller thinks I am in, having assigned me to a certain altitude. And if that contradicts what my maps say, I would not act accordingly, but instead clear up the misunderstanding as quickly as possible. The minimum safe altitude is actually the general term. I suspect the person who asked the question actually meant the grid altitude, which is the minimum altitude applying for the space between two coordinates on a map with a relatively coarse raster. If you don't have any better parameter to go by, you use this, of course. So to put it shortly, all three are important. You must know where you are and what the lowest altitude is that you can fly at if you are unable to see the ground. That's what they're there for.